Okay, right. Okay, well, we're about 5 past and we've got 31, so we might as well kick off. Hi, thank you all for joining us. My name's Peter Holland. I'm with Justine Perrier. We've been developing these little blog sort of webinar sessions to see if we can all get together and just share our experiences. The last one we did was you're on mute. Now, if you said that 12 months ago, most of us wouldn't have known what that meant, but we all know what it means now. And this one is about the experience of people through the year. We called it the year of living dangerously because we've had to live through a pandemic. And as many of you are well aware, we're all working through restructures in many organisations, particularly in Australia. So it's really been a significant year. And as we were talking earlier, saying we wish it was over already, but you know, what could possibly go wrong in the next 60 days with an angry ex-president with his finger on the nuclear button? But anyway, I digress. So the key thing is we're going to have 4 presenters from 4 different universities giving their perspectives. And also as well, I'm going to talk to the research, and then we'll get together as a discussion. Okay, so firstly, in terms of living dangerously, you know, we've all got through so far, so, you know, we can all pat ourselves on the back, but it's good opportunity for us to reflect on how we are going. Now, thankfully, hopefully many of you are aware of this through ANZAM. We did a COVID survey of how you were working. The key indicators before we talk to our presenters were that we found that teaching has gone up 15% in terms of allocations and how much time and people are putting into it. We found research has gone down 25% in terms of time doing that, and admin has gone up 10%. Job insecurity is through the roof, and the expectations of getting another job are around 20% and a better job 10%. So it's pretty grim when you look at that. Online teaching has gone from 41% pre-COVID to 89%. And most people agree that teaching online is far more demanding and intensive than normal teaching. Again, whether that's because of the newness or the fact we're doing it all the time. And most people agree that their admin has gone up significantly. So we're seeing a lot of work intensification through the last 12 months. But I guess the key thing is that in terms of keeping our jobs and promotion, the gold standard is research. And we've seen that significantly drop away for a lot of people. So there is some concerns about that. Justine and I will put up something on the ANZAM website, as this will go on the website as well. It's being recorded. So just give you some background as to how we're all coping and some overviews of what's happened in the Australian-New Zealand context as well. Okay, to start with, we've got 4 presenters. We've got Dr. Lara Thynne from Swinburne with me. She's an HR lecturer, and I can also say her partner is a health professional, so she's not only had to be working at home, but had to sort of you had to start early, I think, Lara, didn't you? Keeping away from work and various people in terms of protecting your husband's health. 2 kids at home as well to school teach. Joy. I've dodged that bullet. I'd probably have a murder here if I had my 2 to teach. And so Lara's had that wonderful experience. We have Andrei from Edith Cowan University, who is on the ANZAM board and is a co-debater with me when we have the ANZAM debates, which seemed a very long time ago now. Amanda Cole from Deakin University, who works with Justine, and Associate Professor Sara Walton from University of Otago. So we are going from Dunedin to Perth for these presentations. So as I said earlier, what could go wrong? Okay, I think we're going to start off with Lara, who's got 5 to 6 minutes to talk about her experience over the last year.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to share my experience. Before I start, I guess I'll provide some context. So I live in metropolitan Melbourne. I work part-time in a teaching and research capacity, and I haven't killed them yet, 2 school-age children, young school-age children. My last day on campus was the 12th of March, and I haven't been in my office since, so it's been a really long time. On reflection, in short, was there balance in the early days? Quite simply, no. Teaching staff were given a week to rapidly roll out to face-to-face learning to our online platform. The structure was asynchronous learning. So that provides a great deal of flexibility to the student to log on and engage with their learning at any time. But it adds a degree of complexity for the academic to design content with academic rigor that's suitable for students that want to join the online classes, or those that can't and want to follow on at home, or those that don't have the technology. So it certainly had a lot of complexities in designing the program to meet those competing aims. For one thing, I found the model of learning brought very unrealistic expectations on my time. Clearly, it was a pandemic, so I was available 24/7. I had nothing else to do, and that was very much the impression my students had. How do we measure success? It's been an incredibly unique situation, and certainly not anything that anyone's expected to be in, and there's no measures. But one thing I've noticed, and it's a really important aspect that's missed in this conversation, was that we weren't working from home. We were working from home during a pandemic, and that's very different. And for many women, including myself, the burden of childcare was predominantly mine. I had homeschool, and I had a husband that was working as an Ambulance Victoria, who was managing the COVID response. So he was working 12 hours a day. So really all of the burden of juggling those was mine. Working part-time was a blessing in some ways. However, those part-time hours very quickly were corrupted as those boundaries between home and work disappeared. I had one child who could work very independently, and I had another that required constant supervision for homeschool. Whilst we're no stranger to Zoom, it's a platform that you traditionally pretended that you didn't have a family. You know, they were obscure, you were on Zoom and you were very professional. And, you know, that changed dramatically, where suddenly I had children and dogs and phone calls and everything appearing in my Zoom calls. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I actually think post-COVID, we probably should embrace that these are just parts of our life and we shouldn't actually have to try and hide them. Specifically with research, what worked, and I guess what can we maybe continue to do to support people like myself, working mothers? I love Ricardo Semler, and I took some advice from him, and it was the only way I was going to stay sane. And the key to getting work done was to stop wearing a watch. I focused on tasks that needed to be doing rather than trying to pretend that I was on a structured work week, because that was never going to happen. The pandemic forced me to change the way I think about time and realize that we actually have a lot more time on our hands if, you know, we're not driving to work and we're not stuck in meetings that we don't need to be at. The time we have is enough if we're able to use our time in a more intelligent form. So for me, the pandemic provided a pathway to my own self-management. That, and I think a crucial change, was that we all got better at Zoom. I know, and I think for me in particular, Zoom leveled the playing field, and the pandemic helped with that. The ability to be able to connect remotely was hugely beneficial for me. And to be honest, post-COVID, I'm not sure that we ever really need to travel 2 hours to a face-to-face meeting in the city. For me, particularly being part-time, if I can limit my sunk costs in travel, the gains for me are exponential. So Zoom and things like that are a great advantage for me, and particularly people's willingness to use them. I think too, we changed the way we approach Zoom, where, you know, I'd be 42 emails backwards and forwards to sort a problem out, where with Zoom, instead you jump on a call and it'd be solved in 2 minutes. And I think that perception of how we use the technologies has been really beneficial. In particular, with the types of research that I do, I conduct a lot of face-to-face in-depth interviews, and during our research project, that was still forecast and planned to happen. The biggest surprise for me was that participants' willingness to conduct these interviews online, it really wasn't a barrier. Interviews were easier to schedule. They felt far less intrusive for the participants, and participants were more at ease. So I think I generated better answers. Participants were in their own homes, and actually they were inconvenienced very little. It also made things like scheduling and recruiting participants much easier. I had a little schedule pre-COVID planned for when I would do these interviews, and I had about 2 months planned out. I actually got all of my interviews scheduled and completed in just over 2 weeks. And that's because I could literally book in Zoom chats with people and get the interviews done without the travel and sort of negotiation of when people would be available. In summary, what didn't work and what did work? Well, I think realistically, early on, balance, I didn't have any. Trying to raise children, homeschool, a lockdown. I'm not really sure there's any way to make that easier. It just is what it is, and you had to hold on and get by. Drawing back to my earlier comment about what are the measures of success in, say, working in a pandemic, I have to say, for me personally, it was rolling out completely new subjects to an online platform. I managed to keep advancing an international research project. And honestly, it was still liking my family after 8 months of being with them 24/7. That's winning. It might not be a validated measure of success, but I think it's a really, really important one. For me personally, I think a lot of people talk about how they, I guess, the scheduling and what they did and but for me, I think a lot of my research success happened because I could use my time effectively, and the willingness of academics that were being forced, and our research partners forced to embrace those technologies, meant that I could effectively use my time and continue moving forward. So I guess for me, whilst the pandemic's been really difficult, particularly in terms of teaching, in terms of researching, I really hope that we can post-COVID, find a balance in human interactions at work, but also keep using these technologies that do make the workplace more inclusive and do in particular help people like myself. So for academics that have reached the higher platforms in their career, if you get a Zoom invite from someone like me, maybe just say yes. Don't always think we have to do the meeting, face-to-face meeting, because it does make it a lot more efficient and a lot quicker. I know we lose some from those lack of interactions, but I think we've all had enough practice that we're pretty good at it now. That's about it from me. That was my experience. And I do still like my family, just maybe my small child, not quite as much.
Fantastic, thank you. And as I say, because we do the same work together, I've met all your family virtually and the dog. Yeah. I think your dog set my dog off the other day barking, so it's one of those type of things. Thank you for that. Look, it's good to get a positive experience out of it. The way Amanda was laughing when you said you loved your family, I'd like maybe she might take up on that as whether she still loves hers or not. Amanda, it's all yours.
Thank you, Peter. And thanks everybody, particularly to Justine for convening this. I think there's a really interesting opportunity for us to have a humane, honest, engaged, genuine discussion about what this extraordinary year has held for all of us. And if we can keep creating these kinds of opportunities, then I would suggest that our universities are going to be much more humane places. So thank you. I realize that this is the first set of PowerPoint slides for a presentation that I've done in over a year, which was really exciting. I took the opportunity. So let me just very quick, I only have one. Let me share my screen with you. I have two. Can you guys see that? Excellent. So I had some fun with this, since it is probably the only conference presentation I'm going to do this year. Shakespeare wrote his best works during the play and other unhelpful comments. How the patriarchy helped my research career during COVID-19. So the title of my presentation is inspired by a senior member of my faculty executive who, in one of their all-staff communiques, attempted to be encouraging to us all in the face of a total crisis. Don't worry about your research. I mean, we're not changing our research expectations of you this year, despite the fact that the world has collapsed. We still want you to publish. We still want you to bring in money. And yes, we understand that peer review has come to a screeching halt. And yes, we know that industry partners have frozen all of their research budgets, just like we've frozen ours. And yes, we know that you all pivoted online overnight, are madly upskilling yourself and your teaching teams in online delivery, doing enormous amounts, as Lara has just said, of pastoral care for your family, your households, not to mention your students in crisis around the globe. We know it's hard, it's really tough, but we're all in this together. And then came the line, remember, Shakespeare did some of his best work during the plague. Now, the comments from the senior member of the executive are emblematic and not specific. We've heard lots of these kinds of discourses come out of university executives at all levels, in that think of this as an opportunity that invariably features a famous male figure's work as an example of how to use your time in lockdown wisely. For those of you who don't know me, my research agenda focuses on equity, diversity, and inclusion issues in the world of work. This means that I spend a lot of time thinking about how things like race, class, gender, age, ability, household, and citizenship status, for example, shape our relationship with and experiences of the world of work in both paid and unpaid labor. I define myself as an activist academic whose research seeks to intervene in the world, and I do my best to live my politics in my research, in my teaching, and in my collegial relationships. So the gendered nature of this discourse was sharply evident to me, and indeed to the many female colleagues I know who struggled to keep their research agendas on simmer even, in the face of social, economic, and public health crises. And this crisis was producing, both within the academy and in our social and economic lives more broadly, a deeply and profoundly unevenly classed, gendered, and racialized impact. We know that women in the academy do more teaching. We know they do more pastoral care of their students, and we know that they do more service than their male colleagues. We also know, as Lara has just indicated, that women do more reproductive labor in the home. And finally, we know also that journals were reporting a sharp downturn in submissions by female scholars. So I found the comments about the ability of male genius to turn lemons into lemonade particularly unhelpful from a senior executive who is not known for his commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, no matter what he may think. However, as I reflected on the content of today's presentation, I can say that these types of unhelpful comments underpin the fact that this year I am currently sitting across the most productive year of my research career. So how did that happen? So I'm just going to share with you here a couple of reflections on how I've managed to arrive at this point. The first point, like Lara just said, is I just gave myself a break. I did zero research and writing for probably 2 months. I was taking care of myself, my household, my students, my teaching team. I was finishing online lectures hours before they were being delivered. I was delivering workshop guides hours before the TAs were to use them. For doing research, forget about it. Come on, I just survived. And that was a major accomplishment in its own right. And yes, I still mostly like my family most of the time. Secondly, I really focused on, in specific reference to the research relationship, I really focused on people and my relationships with them. So as I said, I bring a feminist activist ethos to my work. I had a number of irons in the fire and projects in various stages of development when the pandemic hit. But my only contact with my industry partners for months was in the vein of, how are you doing? My key concern was to show them that I was primarily concerned about our relationships and the research communities that they represent in the first instance. For me, the foundation of good research is good relationships that are built on transparency, trust, accountability, and reciprocity. They are not built on money and outputs. Money and outputs follow from the relationships. So I worried about the relationships first, and it really paid off. And I'd just like to say that this applies equally to my co-authorships. Each author I worked with, and there are lots of them, was also living their own complicated experience of the pandemic. So I took an ethos of care as the first principle to those relationships. And that enabled an amazing foundation for robust, interesting, focused work that we allowed to sort of take us away from the daily lived experience of living in your office, which is right next to your kitchen and the laundry room. The third point for me was that never let a good crisis go to waste is, for me, terrible politics and fundamentally grounded, I would argue, in a sense of entitlement. So I rejected some of the bandwagonism that I would argue we saw happen in relation to pandemic-related research, because I thought that a lot of it was reactionary and uninteresting and borderline exploitative. So I decided to sit and wait and watch and read and listen. I listened to my research communities when they spoke. They were really busy reacting to the crisis and were unable to digest the bigger picture as it unfolded. So while I was listening and absorbing, I was thinking and starting to tinker with some of all those half-done papers that we haven't written in a really long time. And then opportunity knocked, and it was an interesting one. So an advocacy group contacted me and they wanted me to do a COVID survey. And I sort of went, oh boy, at this point. And yes, Peter and Justine, I did your COVID survey and I rolled one out with other people as well. And there was sort of survey burnout at this point. So I said, look, I'm really interested in developing some work with you. But I wanted to do something that was rich and interesting. So what I did was I took a part of a grant that I'd submitted last year, scaled it down, tailored the core research questions to fit against the backdrop of COVID as a natural experiment to test some of these questions in a really sharp way. And importantly, I took the budget from 15,000 to 115,000. And guess what? They said yes. It was funded because the questions we're asking are interesting, but also there was a funding body that was desperate to help have some of these pressing questions answered in ways that were unusual. So opportunity knocked, and we said yes, and I probably should have asked for more because they didn't even cut any money back. And I guess the last point that I'd really like to make about this is the value of deep and rich collaboration that is built again on those principles of reciprocity, trust, and engagement, and careful listening. I think in this environment where our universities are increasingly hostile workplaces in many contexts, where we're seeing our colleagues incredibly terrified for their jobs, legions of unemployed casuals, and increasingly neoliberal management frameworks that sort of de-skill us. I think we need each other. I think we need committed, collegiate, diverse, mixed methods research teams, because they bring both academic and intellectual rigor to our work, but as well as new friendships and support networks. And I just want to say that I think our research counts for a lot more than our metrics, and so do we. So this is, I guess, a call to be generous, to be supportive, and engaged with your colleagues. And if you are, you will often be generously rewarded for your efforts.
Oh, great. Thank you, Amanda, for that. That's very deep and insightful. I think most of us pretty much agree with that, but it's an interesting long-term survival thing. I agree with you that I think, and Justine and I got caught in this. Our study was the Henley study, but they did really well. They did their study at the start of the COVID. We struggled to get a lot of people to do it because I think there was burnout with COVID. Everything was COVID. You know, at the end of the day, I think someone was telling me, Swinburne, 100% of ethics approvals in the last 3 months have been on COVID. Sometimes you've just got to step back and go, there's more than that. But being in Victoria here, where we've been in the curfew, as you know, and lockdown, it seems to have been everything for everybody. But, you know, hopefully we're out of it now. Thank you for that. Now to Perth, to show the diversity of ANZAM, we've got Andrei, our Ukrainian in Perth, to talk to us about his experience.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Lara and Amanda. I must say that I would very much echo your experiences and probably add that as a male in the household, I think I faced some interesting shocks, realizing how much my wife has been taking on in the home. And when this happened and we started to split things 50-50, and I actually started doing a lot of that domestic work, I just realized how much of it there was. So that was quite an eye-opener, but I think in many ways very fulfilling, to be an equal partner and to be engaged in the relationship that way. I know surprisingly it actually brought us closer, which is not a comment I've heard often about people's experiences at home during COVID. So what I wanted to focus on was actually what helped me keep my research on track and relevant during this time. And after a good think about it, there was only really two things. And the first was a strong research pipeline. So everything that I published this year has been a result of projects that I've started 2-3 years ago or more. Good research takes time, a lot of time. So I make sure that I've got a number of different projects on the go at any one moment, all at different stages of development. Some are new, maybe just a few pages of lit review that I've sent off with a grant application, so they're waiting for funding. Some are collecting data, I'm collecting data, some my co-authors are working on. Some other projects waiting for co-authors to write their sections, you know who you are. Most importantly, some of those are under review, sometimes for months and months at multiple journals before they're accepted. Now, how many you need under review will vary with your academic level and your research load. I'm a level B with about 40 to 50% research. So that means I need to produce at least 2 A's or a Q1 every year. So for me, I make sure that at any one time, I've got at least 2 papers under review at good journals. And I spend the rest of my time trying to move those other projects in my pipeline toward their first submission. So that way, as soon as one paper is accepted, there's another ready to take its place. Now, this pipeline approach to publication has really saved me and buffered me against the disruption of COVID. If I didn't have these other works on the go and things almost at completion, I think I would have struggled very much to get something up off the ground and accepted and published. And as Amanda's pointed out, senior executive has been very quick to acknowledge the additional challenges that we've faced without, of course, relaxing any of the expectations that are on us. But with this, when COVID hit, online teaching took center stage. It didn't actually matter. Still had papers under review and that long stream of projects coming up behind them. So that has helped carry me through. The second thing that's helped has actually been media engagement. So in addition to producing research papers, this year I started working to translate my research, my insights for a more general audience and then disseminate that to the wider public. I started by pitching a few ideas to the conversation, and that was based on some previously published papers. So they were all written, all that knowledge and insight sitting there waiting to be taken up and digested into a more palatable form. Few tips about the conversation. Don't write the story until they accept your pitch. It'll change anyway, sometimes several times. Focus on the academic content. Let your editor supply the news relevance. That's their business. The academic stuff's yours. The process is stochastic. Expect long delays, months sometimes, and then sudden progress, talking minutes, hours. And then at the end of it, instant publication. Very different to what we're used to with journals. So why would you bother with something like that? Number one reason for me has been profile. I've been writing about leadership and organizational behavior for years, but suddenly I published in the conversation and now I have credibility. People knocking on my door, sending me emails, asking me for my opinion, all these flow-on effects. There's been at least a half dozen radio interviews. It just goes on, invited contributions. And none of that happened before I started engaging with the media. The second is exposure. For one of them, the original paper I wrote has been read maybe 100 times. The story I wrote about it in the conversation, over 60,000. Now, that's not just the lay public. It's also academics, reviewers, editors, potential collaborators. So that is very, very useful. People see your name, they get a feel for what you're about, and understand that credibility. So it's tough, but it's also rewarding. Use it strategically to translate and promote published research. Be sure to include a DOI link and track that altmetric score. That has been really good to help articulate some of that research engagement and impact for the next promotion. So that's how I managed to stay relevant, keep my research on track. Now I do have one warning, and that's against the stampede toward fad research. And Peter hinted at this earlier as well, that pretty much everything has been COVID related. Now we know government research funding is getting redirected towards COVID related projects. A lot of university funding too. Now journals are equally eager for these topical contributions. But personally, I worry that some of the editors might rush or fast track the peer review process to be the first to post those clickbait papers. Now, as an associate editor myself, I recall desk rejecting utter garbage submissions around mid-year. Some scholars had just thrown together a haphazard bunch of scales at respondents, sprinkled on some COVID seasoning, and pushed out brand new papers within a month. There were holes everywhere, from the theoretical foundation to the methods, to of course the near frantic writing. It was like reading last-minute undergrad assignments again. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't research hyper events that reshape the global organizational landscape. Of course we should, but let's do it in a way that matters, not by tacking COVID onto the end of existing projects and not at the expense of our academic integrity. Please don't join the sloppy bandwagon of fad research rushing to meet its retracted future. Instead, let's continue doing work that matters and take the time to do it properly. As scientists, we must look in all directions, not allow ourselves to be led by the nose from trend to trend by public opinion, government funding, and journal editors' capricious appetites. Thank you.
Andrei, thank you for that. And there's your warning. Don't send any rubbish to JMO, guys. Okay, you're well aware of that now. Thank you,
or anywhere
Andrei.
else.
and I'm glad that you've got closer to your partner with all this extra washing and ironing that you're doing. Well done, mate. Sara is in Otago, and she is our final presenter to talk about the experiences she's had, and obviously from the New Zealand perspective as well. Over to you, Sara.
Kia ora koutou. I'm just going to try and share my screen as well, because is that working?
Yes. Yep.
Yep. We in New Zealand have obviously been back to what we call level 1 or semi-normal without our borders being open for some time. So I feel that I'm in a slightly different position to many of the speakers. But thank you to all the speakers. And I guess, you know, not having a particular name, but obviously the two earlier female speakers, I could echo some of those concerns. And my first slide is just trying to illustrate because I now have the benefit of hindsight, I guess, to look back upon our lockdown and think about what we actually did. So like some of you, I helped out students. I think I did year 10 maths again, Pythagoras' theorem, for those of you who remember way back to our school days. And I have too, you can see there's a dog, baking, jigsaws, lots of walking. My family's pretty outdoorsy, so trying to get out and about was quite important. So I do live in Otago, Dunedin, which is in the South Island. I don't think we've had any cases since May in the South Island of Aotearoa, so we've been quite fortunate. So I feel in a slightly different place to some of you, but I won't rub it in. But you can see there that's actually the main street in Dunedin there, and that was in the first couple of days after lockdown. There was just no traffic everywhere, which I'm sure we're all used to. Okay, so and this is really similar to lots of you. I pivoted 2 courses online and ran a master's program this year. So like many of you had 4 days, I think it was, to turn everything around and get it organised. So I'm sure we all, and I really like some of the sentiments they're hearing across some of our leadership, and some of the messages we were given seem and sound really similar. We also did a survey. And when we jumped from level 4 to level 3, which I think was around May, to be honest, and that meant that some of us were sort of going back to work and things were sort of starting to ease off quite a lot from being absolutely locked down. We did a working from home study, but we did it across New Zealand and in conjunction with an Irish collaborating group. We had 2,500 participants, and we just wanted to get their experiences of working from home. Interestingly enough, and this is echoing some of these other calls as well, we had 80% of our participants as female, which is really interesting, and so did Ireland, and they had about 5,000 participants. And then also we found out that after COVID, as we started moving out of lockdown, that it's been largely females that have been losing their jobs, and I think it's about 80% of the job loss have been females as well. So it was interesting around those figures, around some of the gender experiences, and I think some of the other speakers have spoken about that really nicely. What I did during lockdown, and we had 8 weeks from March to May. In New Zealand, there was a strong emphasis on science, and I'm not sure of all the messages that you've had across Australia, but here there was really strong media presence of scientists in terms of around COVID and COVID responses. And so I took it upon myself, and many others did as well in our school, to actually provide some expert opinion on some of the business implications around COVID. Now, my area is sustainability and climate change, so I'm particularly interested in resilience and more resilient business models. So I sort of took that angle there. And also the New Zealand government was borrowing, as many governments are, a considerable amount of money and starting to develop projects. And I wrote opinion pieces at that time around how that spending that money is really important to how we build an economy for the future. And that was kind of really important to me and a number of others who I wrote with as well, in opinion pieces talking about just and sustainable economies and resilient economies for the future. So we felt there was an opportunity there, and I think there still is, with our current government staying on as well for the next 3 years, really around there being more informed discourse in our media around post-COVID recoveries. So I connected there. I also write a regular column for the paper, so I had some contacts there as well, but we have a science communication centre that was really helpful as well, and would also feed out comments. So I did numerous radio interviews and things around that, but I wasn't alone. It was quite common for many of us to be doing those kind of things, and it was nice to see the science being listened to. Now, my research post-COVID, because obviously we're sort of back now, as I said, as normal. And I'm sorry to say that actually, even despite making lots of different promises to myself, like I'm not going to do 101 kids sport, when I finish this, I'm driving to futsal, and it's just got back to being that busy again. And actually doing this has made me realize I did say I didn't want to be this busy again and running around, and before you know it, you're back into it. So please, from someone who's gone straight back, I feel like I didn't want to do that. So I've really got to rethink in many ways. But my research I guess I'm not contradicting what Andrei said, but I do think it's really important for us to be thinking about post-COVID in our research. We're entering into quite a different world. And I'm kind of that feeling that we have the opportunity now to actually really think quite clearly about how we reset our world and think about how we build more resilience and what it is we're doing. And I think we as academics have a really important voice around those particular issues, and helping steer popular opinion anyway, if we can, or policy in many ways with, external research grants and projects that you're part of, to actually think about what it is we do. So while I'm not changing my emphasis, my research projects that I already had going, I'm certainly trying to put that post-COVID lens on it, because if you're talking climate change now, it's quite difficult because everyone's in a post-COVID survival mode, but you're actually got to turn that around and start talking about safe and just area, operating spaces for building future resilience. So those kind of twists and things is what I'm doing a lot of my research too. That's me done. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you, Sara. I mean, I think the good opportunity there of you finishing it off was the fact that you didn't get hit as bad as Australia, and certainly as Victoria did, but obviously post-COVID there are a variety of things that you are trying to maintain that you had through COVID. Is that what a key issue for you, to try and get the balance right?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I probably, if I'm going to be honest, I think it gets really busy when we've come back, because not only are we doing our campus, but we've now pivoted to trying to go distance next year because we're not allowing international students in. Yeah. So then that creates a dilemma at the university level of the income loss. And so you've got students here, and now we're developing cohorts internationally for distance for next year. So unfortunately, I don't mean to be the voice of doom, but things don't seem to get any better when we go back to being in the office. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Again, I'll just ask one question before I open up. The other three presenters as well, what's the thing you're going to try and maintain as we come out of COVID that you've developed over the period? What's the key thing you're trying to hold the line? Is it work-life balance, Zooming meetings? I think, Lara, you indicated. Lara, do you want to have a think about that?
Yeah, definitely. For me, I think, as I said, particularly because I'm part-time, if I'm traveling to do interviews and things like that, that's a lot of my time that's taken up just in travel that I'm not getting any gain from, and it's a sunk cost. So if I can continue offering interviews and research through like technologies like Zoom, and or even meeting with colleagues, if that can be done on Zoom, that saves me a lot of time. As well as, I think a lot of department meetings and things like that are quite often, you go in and you sit there, and there's actually no reason really we all need to be in the same room. We can see it can happen. So for me, if it's a non-work day, if I can just jump onto a Zoom call for a meeting, that's really beneficial, and that's really useful, and it keeps me connected to the workplace as well. So I do hope we continue being
I was going to say, dare I say, you can actually drop out of departmental meetings if you're on Zoom because your technology went down.
It failed.
There's a hint, everybody. So there you go. Thank you, Lara. Amanda, anything particularly you're going to stick to?
It's really interesting, partially because we can't travel overseas, but a lot of my research is in the UK and Canada, so I tend to spend a lot of time on planes, and the quietude of this year has been surprisingly welcome in that regard. So I think that is something that I would like to consider, particularly because the research team that I work with, we actually tried to quantify at one point our carbon footprint. And, Sara, to your point, and Lara, to your point, do we really need to have these meetings face to face? What is the consequence of, is this a value added activity that can be outweighed by the fact that we're generating however many hundreds of tons of CO2? And to Sara's point, I would like to maintain much less sports ball through the week.
Okay, now that's a good point. I don't know, you're probably the same as my peak period from it was 9 in the morning to about 11, and then 6 till 8 with these overseas meetings, and as well as teaching at night. And you just think it becomes the norm. And Lara and I work in a team that we're doing a co-research with people in Wales, and it works because you got 9 people on board over 2 hours. And it works, you don't have to say, well, when we come to Wales or you come to Australia, you do it. So we found that's been quite effective. And Andrei.
Thanks. One of the things that I found really interesting is something that Lara mentioned. It's decoupled my understanding of time and work and the work day. So what my wife's also an academic, and what we found is that as long as we get about 5-6 hours productive time a day, it doesn't matter when it happens. Sometimes we're up till 2 in the morning because you're on a roll. Sometimes we don't do anything today and then we'll do 10 hours tomorrow. So that was one thing that was really useful, and I'm definitely have kept since then. But it's come with an interesting challenge because it's taken me away from my colleagues in some ways. And I agree, Zoom has been great, but it's not quite the same. So one thing that we've actually done at ECU now that we're back on campus is, as a department, we've actually decided to spend at least 3 days in the office together at reasonably coherent times, just because our culture has suffered. That connection between people, the amount of collaboration that we've been able to do, those informal conversations, that feeling of connectedness, I think we've actually missed that. So in some ways, we've pushed back against digital, and decided that we want to be a little bit of a community again, which has been very interesting and is completely in juxtaposition to my newfound conceptualization of productive time. But so I'm left with this very difficult challenge.
Yeah,
and I agree both sides.
It's a good point, and a quick plug in there. Although we all meet once a year at ANZAM, it's been postponed to 2021. Edith, Cowan, Perth. So there's a quick plug for you guys that if you want it, I'll catch up next year in Perth with Andrei and the rest of the crew. ANZAM will be next year, and can send something out if you're interested in that. And opening it up, anyone else have any questions generally or specifically to the panel that they'd like to ask? Justine.
Oh, yes, thanks. It looks like Kevin wants to ask a question, but I'll ask mine first. I'm really interested. So, Andrei, what you were saying about your productive time and your social time. One, I'm interested to know that now that you're back on campus and you're having these sort of culture building social experiences together, whether that is actually helping, I don't know, to be more productive. Is it helping everyone feel a greater sense of connection? It's helping, I don't know, build the culture as was intended.
That's a good question. Realistically, we don't know yet. So it's only last week that we decided that there's an issue and this is how we're going to start addressing it. So, but the feeling around the table, I was quite surprised because it was sort of produced as like this draconian, you have to be in your office kind of approach. But as we started talking about it around the table with different members of the department, everyone was actually very agreeable to it, which in some ways was quite a surprise to me, even people who are traditionally not regular office goers. And I think it's maybe in response to those feelings of isolation. But time will tell if it actually helps us be more productive.
But I think, like, if I reflect on Deakin experience, and I'm sure it's the same at some of the other universities that have gone through major workplace change, I think there's something about coming together face to face, not that we can yet in Victoria, that will help us sort of to cement our relationships a little bit better than what we're doing, because we've had such upheaval, not only the pandemic, major workplace change, so many other things going on, that it's like we need that human contact. We can get it through Zoom to a certain extent, but we need just that sort of, that camaraderie, I suppose.
I would agree with that. And if I reflect on some of my research collaborations, those relationships have only significantly progressed, in my opinion, after some face-to-face interaction.
Okay, and also, can I say possibly a day away from the family as well, guys?
That would be helpful. I don't particularly like all of my family.
A day away from them is occasionally good, even the ones you like. Kevin, sorry, Justine?
Sorry, Victoria's got her hand up. Okay,
Victoria.
Hello, everyone. I put a comment in the chat with regards to Andrei's comments about needing face-to-face interaction. And I'm wondering that there's probably many of you who actually supervise students. And I'm wondering what has changed for you as supervisors in terms of perhaps not having access to students for face-to-face interaction. Because I know it's a different experience for me. Yeah.
I can answer from my perspective. I think I've got PhD student, in some ways it's worked better. I think because it's been a scheduled, I will meet you at this time at 2 o'clock, and instead of me sitting in my office waiting for them to turn up. For me personally, it's worked better, but it's also been a bit easier. Like, no, show me your work. What are you up to? What are you doing? What's your plan? So I think, yes, still there's an element of being able to see your student, but we've had my students about to submit. So we've had their review and everything. That's all been, sort of everything's the same. I guess it's just missing that small amount of human interaction that you don't get. But for me, I've still been able to progress my student. It hasn't, I don't think it's made it any more difficult. Maybe it's a little bit more burden on my time in that those Zoom meetings are always taken up as an opportunity. So it's every single fortnight, where perhaps pre-COVID, he wasn't as demanding on my time. But again, it's kind of swings and roundabouts and trying to get that balance to work.
If I can just add, we've been very fortunate that we've been able to retain face-to-face, and as is my perspective, I've tried to use that as much as possible with my PhD students, as I'm not sure what there is, but there is something different about face-to-face.
Can I just add, just from my experience with my PhD student, we have our formal PhD meetings, but we also have a social check-in. Are you okay? Is everything going all right? We're not talking about what you're doing, where you're at the project. We're talking more generally about, all right, how's isolation going for you? Are you getting out? Just checking in on their mental health, I suppose, because they are quite isolated, more so than myself. And yeah, and I think that's been really positive for them, I hope.
Yeah, good point, Justine. I found that the students who are international, the psychology of being locked down in Melbourne, not that they can't go, not that they're missing home, but they can't go home. And a couple of them have had family have had illnesses, which just extends it. And the universities have generally been pretty good, but again, I think it's uni and department by department how they deal with it. Okay, any other, Kevin, did you have a question, Kevin? You did?
No, not really. I was just popping back in video since we were
right.
A community of the whole. But since I've got the floor, I'll just make an editorial comment, which is I really like the idea of creating communal times for interaction and pairing that with the notion that meetings are often just information transfer. I hope that we'll use the time that we used to use for meetings to distribute information as it could be more efficiently distributed, and then have that higher value add time, as opposed to my fear is that we'll discover that we need that and layer one on top of the other.
Okay. Anyone else got questions? We're starting to get sort of a time limit, but we can take a couple more questions if there are out there. I'm looking around my screen. Surely we've got a question from our president, Melanie. Hint, hint. You're on mute.
Hang on, I know I've got to find my mute button. Yeah, look, I don't know. I don't really have a question, but it's been really interesting listening to people's experiences. But I think similar to Sara, we've been business as usual pretty much in Tasmania since probably July. So, you know, things haven't really changed, but I think I can probably agree with what Sara's saying. I think coming out of lockdown and you know, thinking that you're going to go back to these habits, I've found that life has actually probably I'm in a slightly different position, I guess, because I'm in a head of school position. So life is fairly hectic anyway in those sorts of roles. But we've got this other slight challenge that, Andrei, it'd be interesting to see how you guys go with your face-to-face, where people are consistently booking in the meetings back to back on the hour. And that's really interesting when you actually have to physically go to a meeting in person and then your next one's on the hour. So, you know, we've had to change our culture around that. So, yeah, but you know, hear what other people are saying and agree with Sara, I think. So similar situation.
Did you want to respond, Andrei? I thought you were leaning forward to respond.
And love Andrei's housework, by the way.
Well, he's in charge of catering at Anzam now, quite clearly.
Right. And vacuuming.
Okay, guys.
My kitchen, actually.
We're just on our last minute. Has anyone's got any comments or anything they'd like to say before we sign off? Yes, no, okay. I'd just like to say, can we just give a virtual applause to our 4 presenters, because they've taken the time out of their hectic and thoughtful life to have a thoughtful think about how the last year has gone for them. I hope you've enjoyed these couple of seminars and blogs that we've run, just to give us a sense that we are still a community in some sense at ANZAM. And although we don't have the conference this year, we'll be back next year, and Justin and I might run a few more of these, just so we can all feel connected with each other outside of our little houses. So again, thank you all. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope you got something from it. I hope you still feel a bit connected with the rest of the academic environment. So just like to thank you, and I think that brings us to an end, unless Justine, you have anything as the master of ceremonies? No?
No master of ceremony here.
No.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very much.
And will be circulated to you.
All right, yes, it's been recorded, isn't it? And it'll be circulated, and we'll put something out about the COVID survey. Yeah. Amanda, we will put something out about the COVID. You don't have to read it, honestly. It's but yes, it's just give you some idea of how people have felt dealing with COVID. Thank you all again, and we'll probably see you when we do another one, maybe in the new year. Okay, guys, thank you. Bye.